All right, so welcome everyone. We are Fulfillment Friday today, Fulfillment Friday, Resilience Week coming toward the end. We have Miss Debbie Smith with us, and really there's no introduction needed. She's gonna jump right into her story. She's a resident of Williamsburg, and she's bringing you a personal resilience story this morning. So I welcome you, I welcome her. Please, Debbie Smith, take it away.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to have been included in Resilience Week, Virginia. And excuse me, and even though I was thrilled to be in a week with such capable speakers, I wondered what I could really bring to the table. What did I have to offer? I thought I knew what being resilient meant, and I really did, but I didn't feel that I quite fit that definition. So I decided to go to the dictionary to make sure that I knew that I had a clear understanding of what it meant to be resilient. And all of my concerns were confirmed. I really didn't fit that definition. Every definition that I found said in essence that to be resilient meant to have the ability to rebound quickly, to readily recover from an adverse situation, to rapidly spring back to previous form after being stressed. And I thought, this definitely isn't me. So now what am I going to do? Because I'd already agreed to present, so I was going to have to come up with something. So I kept looking, thank goodness for Google. I kept looking for a different definition of resilience in other resources until I finally found one that kind of had a loophole qualifying me to be here with you today. This description said resilience was the ability of something to return to its original shape after it's been stretched, pressed, bent, etc. Well, this was the only resource that I found that did not use the adjectives similar to quickly, readily, or rapidly. I now felt more comfortable speaking in this forum because my journey from March 3rd of 1989 to where I am today certainly was not any of those adjectives. It would take me years of stumbles and falls, not knowing if I could return to my feet again, bruised and broken with each tumble. I wasn't even sure if I would or I wanted to recover or to try again. Returning to my original shape was not a comforting thought for me. I needed to be able to move beyond who I was originally before the stretching and pressing and bending began. I needed to move to who I was meant to be. For me, it was to who I was created to be. From my earliest memory, I have always wanted to be somebody else or someone else. When I was young and before blended families was such a term, because it wasn't the norm, I wanted to be someone that had the same last name as my siblings and my parents. And I wanted parents that weren't alcoholics. But God didn't allow me to be someone else, and I would have to learn and grow in the environment in which I had been placed. As I grew older, though, I longed to be that someone else who would sing the solos in the school choir, but I was too shy to even try out for the part. You see, I had an inside scoop that maybe nobody else knew, or maybe they did know, and and that was that I knew there was always somebody who could do a better job than I could, someone who knew more about music, someone who had a trained ear. So I became content with my place as part of the whole as I sang, praying that God would make me that someone else one day. I can remember sitting in church and having the desire to be that someone else that God would call to be a missionary. But I knew that I wasn't smart enough or brave enough to do such an awesome thing, and that God would need to send someone else to the lands far away. And that someone else, they would be able to master the language and culture so much better than I could. And so I would remain here in a safer place, maybe even helping to send others to those places that I envisioned in my heart. But I never dreamed that one day I would become someone else, that God would make me that someone else that you have probably talked about with your family and friends. You may have felt sad and even sorry for me at times. There was probably even a brief moment when this someone else made you feel uncomfortable and vulnerable. I became that someone else that you read about in the newspaper, or hear about on television news, and consciously or unconsciously, you put me out of your mind before you finish folding the paper or change the channel on the TV. It's someone else, you say in your mind and in your heart, just a faceless individual, no connection to me. And you're right, because it is always someone else. It does always happen to someone else. But I am here to tell you that today or tomorrow, you or someone you love could be that someone else. We all have the misconception that it just can't happen to me. But on March 3rd of 1989, I became someone else because on that day, I became a victim of rape. Please don't touch me, but hold me in your arms and don't ever let me go. I'm okay. At least I'm alive. Oh God, I wish that he had killed me. I don't want to answer any more of your questions, but your questions help to bring forth this raging hurt within me. I don't remember, but I'll never forget. Please just leave me alone, but stay close beside me. It's not my fault. Oh dear God, how could I have ever allowed this to happen? It's a nightmare. Somebody please wake me up, but just let me sleep, because to awake means I have to face the reality of it all. These are just a few of contradictory feelings that I experienced as I tried to make sense of what had just happened to me. I was confused and shocked. And each one of these statements just kind of whirled around in my head, and my heart felt as if it had been torn apart. Trying to process what had just happened to me was actually almost as terrifying as the actual event. I kept asking myself, was it real? Had I truly just been raped? There was this battle that was raging within, and I thought, do I fight the insanity, or do I allow my mind to take me to a place where I no longer had to think, a place where bad things just don't happen? Resiliency, not a thought, not a hope, not even a dream. I'll ask you now to travel back with me to that fateful day, but just as an observer, to hopefully encourage you if you feel that you are less than resilient. It's around 1 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Outside it's cold and gray. There's a light mist falling. I'm in a nice neighborhood in the city of Williamsburg, Virginia, which, by the way, if you don't know, happens to be one of the safest cities, not only in our country, but not only in our state, but in our country. My husband, a police lieutenant at the time for the Williamsburg Police Department, is upstairs asleep after having been up for over 30 hours. But how could I have possibly been any safer? But I had no way of knowing that within just a matter of moments, how my life and every single life that touched mine was about to be changed forever. And I was unsure if I would ever find my way back again. It was a typical day in the life of any wife and mother. I was cleaning house, doing laundry, preparing dessert for dinner with friends that evening. And in the midst of everything that was going on, I noticed that my clothes dryer didn't seem to be working properly. So I stepped outside to check the exhaust vent. When I returned, I decided to leave that back door unlocked, a door that is always locked. But I thought, I'm going to return right away with the trash. After all, what can happen to me within just a few minutes? Time for me to go in and gather that trash and come back out. But before I could return, just within a matter of probably 5 minutes, a stranger entered that unlocked back door and nearly destroyed, but has definitely changed my life forever. This masked stranger forcibly took me out of my home into the woods behind my house, where he blindfolded, robbed, and repeatedly raped me. This crime deprived me of my innocent outlook on life and of my freedom. The sound of his voice rang through my ears as a deafening clamor. Remember, I know where you live, and if you tell anyone, I will come back and kill you and your family. But I did tell someone. As soon as I was allowed to return home, I ran upstairs to where my husband lay sleeping, and I woke him with the only words that I could get out of my mouth. I said, he got me, Rob. He got me. I pleaded with him not to call the police. I pleaded with him not to tell anyone because I feared that this man would keep his promise to return and kill me and my family. But the police officer and my husband knew there was no way that we could allow a crime like this to go unreported. He also convinced me of the importance of going to the hospital, but all I wanted to do was to take a shower. I wanted to try to wash it all away. I wanted to try to start the day again, to spring back to my original form, but that could not happen, for you cannot unknow evil once you have been introduced to it. I'll never forget that within minutes after my husband made the phone call to the police, my home became a place filled with chaos. There were officers and detectives all over the place, going through my things and pounding me with questions.
Can you tell me exactly what happened?
What's going on?
Did he actually penetrate?
Why don't they believe me?
Did he have any
How
facial
could this
hair?
happen to me?
Was he white or black?
When are they going to leave?
Did you resist
What
or
do they
scream?
want from me?
Did he physically
Where is all
harm you?
this noise coming
Had
from?
you ever seen this
Why
man?
did I ever let my husband call the police? Stop, I can't do this, was what I wanted to scream. I wanted to run upstairs to my bedroom and lock the door. And had I known what was about to happen, it's probably what I would have done. The harder that I tried to focus and make sense out of all of the confusion around me, the more my mind and body resisted. Nothing seemed real, and I was fighting with every ounce of strength I could muster to maintain my sanity. But then I thought maybe it was already too late, and I had already lost the battle. Perhaps none of this was real, and I had truly gone insane. Surely I could not have just been raped in the middle of the afternoon. I tried to accept what had happened to me, but to consent for it to be part of my reality meant to live with it for the rest of my life. But how? The hospital visit for me proved to be almost as violating as the actual crime. I was questioned, probed, plucked, scraped, swabbed. Everyone was coming at me from all sides. I had 3 wonderful nurses, well-meaning nurses, and a very caring doctor, each of them wanting something different, but every one of them wanted a part of me. I had to relive the events of this horrible ordeal over and over and over again before I was even able to process it in my own mind. It's all a blur, and yet sitting here today, it's as vivid as it was as it happened yesterday. My feeling of confusion is what is so memorable for me. I knew I was there in the midst of everything that was going on, but somehow I felt severed from my body, and this was just the beginning. They made me remove my clothing, marking it for evidence. I went there feeling defeated, because after all, I had made a conscious decision to leave that back door unlocked for those brief but life-changing moments. I had made a conscious decision after trying to get away once to relinquish myself to this man who had entered my home. And now these people wanted the very clothes off of my back. I had literally been stripped of everything that seemed normal, everything that seemed real to me. I was given a hospital gown to put on, something that many other people had worn before me, washed and dried and neatly folded, but it wasn't mine. All that was familiar to me was gone. Inside and outside, everything that identified me was gone, and I thought it would be gone forever. How do I recover without knowing who I am anymore? We were finally allowed to go home where things would be familiar and I could begin to process what had really happened to me. I thought the worst was over now. I had survived this terrible ordeal. That's what they told me when I was in the hospital. I'd be able to put it behind me and go on. But I didn't understand that the worst was yet to come. because my very favorite place, my safe place, my home, now seemed nothing more than just cold stone and wood. Everything had this really strange look about it. Nothing felt familiar at all. The one place I'd always felt comfortable and safe was now taunting me with memories. I would relive the nightmares day after day, remembering more and more as the shock began to wear off. It was far from being over. I stumbled in the darkness of the evil that had shadowed my life. For the first time in my life, I couldn't find any reason to want to live. The love of my family and friends just wasn't enough for this, to get me through this. They couldn't erase the memories. They couldn't take away the pain. Even my faith in God seemed to be failing me. In fact, I just couldn't understand how a God who was supposed to love me could have allowed this to happen. The love of my family and friends, though, was what I had always relied on. And my faith was my big thing that I'd relied on to get me through all of the bad things that happened in my life. But now they were letting me down. There was nothing to help me to get me back on my feet. Who was going to help me when I was knocked down? Their support for me, who was going to be there as I pulled myself back up in an upright position. There was no escaping the pain and no escaping fear. Fear will not be satisfied until it has taken over your entire mind and body, just as a cancerous tumor. It won't stop until it has invaded every single part of you. It cripples like arthritis, making every movement unbearable until it finally doesn't seem worth the pain. You become paralyzed, feeling trapped and helpless. It was always there. It was there in my waking hours as well as in my dreams. On many occasions, my husband can tell you that he would be awakened in the middle of the night to the sound of the blood-curdling screams from the constant nightmares. Counseling for me at that point was not even a consideration because I couldn't bear to go over the details, not one more time. I couldn't stand the sound of my voice as it spoke the words. I began to realize that I could not and would not live this way. Death seemed to be the only alternative, the only answer that would end this horrible nightmare that had become my life. In death, I thought there would be peace and quiet. I'd no longer have to hear his voice in my ears, feel his arm around my neck, or see his face before my eyes. I thought my mind would finally be at rest. I couldn't risk surviving. I needed to succeed in this final act. My death needed to be fast, or to trade one suffering for another was not an option for me. I decided a gun would be my answer. I planned my suicide over and over again in my head, but there was one problem that had no solution, and that was my husband and my 2 children. Who would find me? And would they live in guilt, feeling that they had somehow failed me? What would this do to them? I couldn't bear the thought that they would have to endure the same kind of pain that I was feeling. I thank God today that my love for them was stronger than my need to rid myself of this torment. I finally grabbed on to that 3-stranded cord, and they became my only reason to live. One of the most frequent comments I heard after my rape was, "At least you're alive." But I can tell you still today that while I was alive physically, inside I had died. And in fact, I cursed my attacker for leaving me alive to live with this pain. I thought it was part of his cruel punishment. Resiliency? Maybe a hint, but only for those that I loved. This intruder never laid a physical hand on anyone else in our family, but when he left that day, he left each and every one of us a victim. He touched emotions in us that we had never known before. Suddenly there was rage in the eyes of my very tender-hearted teenage son. My daughter was afraid to go from the porch to the driveway after dark, and each of us, especially my husband, as I'm sure you can understand, felt that awful pain of guilt. He felt as if he could protect the whole city of Williamsburg, but had somehow failed to protect his own life in our own home. My son was conscience-stricken because the attacker had used the baseball bat that he had neglected to put away the night before. and it was his job to take the trash out before he left for school that morning. I felt responsible because I had made that conscious decision to leave that back door open for those brief but life-changing moments. Our home, which had always been filled with love and laughter, was now just a house filled with bitterness, anger, fear, and guilt, hurting people living together. Who's left to help us to rebound? But my family and I weren't the only victims that day. Every person that touched my life or my family's life was to feel the effect of this crime. They no longer felt safe in their sweet little town of Williamsburg. They too felt invaded and vulnerable. I could see the pain in their eyes because I was a constant reminder to them that rape truly can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. They would guard their words so that they wouldn't say anything that might upset me. They were angry for me, and yet there was nothing that they could do. They felt so helpless. I often found myself comforting them, in fact. The owner of a gas station where we used to frequent in Williamsburg used to say to me, "I always love seeing you, but I can't look at you without remembering what happened." Our minds and bodies as a community ached for understanding, and yet there was none to be found. I waited every day to hear that the news that they had found this man that had changed my life so desperately, all of our lives so drastically. Those days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years. And then I lived in constant fear of his return, hearing the words over and over in my head, "I know where you live, and I will come back to kill you and your family if you tell anyone." If he couldn't get to me, my biggest fear was, would he hurt one of them, especially my children? And I can tell you today, knowing about him what I know, I have no doubt that given the opportunity, he would have. How can I recover if I still feel as if I'm in the midst of what I'm trying to recover from? The Williamsburg Police Department followed every lead and every clue, only to come up empty-handed. Doubts flooded my mind. Had it really happened? Was this just some terrible nightmare? Does anybody beside my husband believe me? Or do they doubt my words as I doubt myself? But in my heart, I knew it wasn't a nightmare that was going to fade with time, but it was one that I was going to have to live forever. I began to realize that the quality of life that I had once known would never be restored. I craved peace of mind, and I actively did everything I could think of to attain it. An alarm system was installed in our home, including panic buttons throughout the house, as well as one that I could wear around my neck. It looked exactly like the one where the woman's fallen and can't get up. My husband and my children gave me grief over that. There was a privacy fence put around our backyard. Motion detectors were installed. At one point, I even took to carrying a gun. I finally did put that away. You can all relax, because when you have to move a 38 out of the way in order to get your checkbook out, store clerks tend to get a little nervous. It is a really fast way to get in and out of Walmart, though, just saying. But my biggest fear was that because I had become so paranoid and fearful for my life and the lives of my family, I was afraid that I'd hurt some innocent person, all because maybe they got too close or came up from behind me. There just didn't seem to be any way to attain this peace and rest that my mind and body craved for so long. I wondered, how was I ever going to learn to live again? I was going to suffer daily with the memory of a man who was in my life for such a short span of time, and he may never have to pay for his crime, but my family and I would have to pay for it forever. I can tell you that it is only by the grace of God that I am here today. For 6.5 years, I simply existed, trying to go on and live life as normal as possible. Is this really resiliency? Just breathing, hoping that your next breath will not come? On July the 26th of 1995, my husband walked into our living room and handed me the composite that he had carried with him ever since the incident, and told me that I could throw it away, that we weren't going to need it anymore. Not only had they identified my rapist through a cold DNA hit, but he was already in prison for another crime and was incarcerated just 6 months after he attacked me. But for the first time in those 6.5 years, I could feel myself breathe. I took a deliberate breath. I felt validated. There was now a real name and a real face to go with the nightmare that I had been living. Everyone was going to know that I was telling the truth, that it was real. Finally, I could quit looking over my shoulder. No longer did I have to drive around in circles, just hoping that a neighbor would drive by so that I could get the courage to get out of my car if no one else was, to go to my front door if no one else was home. Unfamiliar noises no longer left me panic-stricken. I no longer had to scan the faces in the crowd to see if he was following me. And finally, my husband's pretty grateful that I don't wake him up as often in the middle of the night with the ear-piercing screams. Within, healing had begun. Resiliency tried to get up. I was at least on all fours, reaching for something to help me to get up on my own two legs. Some peace had come at last, but this peace was going to come with a huge price tag. There was no question in my heart and mind that I had to prosecute. I had truly begun this process with excitement and great anticipation, because to me, this was the beginning of the end. But my excitement was soon deflated as I began to realize just how slowly the wheels of justice can turn. At my first meeting with the Commonwealth's attorney, I was asked countless questions. As I gave a detailed description of the rape, tears began to flood my face. I was informed from him that I needed to separate myself from this incident. The words rolled off his tongue in a matter-of-fact way, and I thought to myself, hadn't I tried to separate myself from this event for the last 6.5 years? But you see, my tears made him uncomfortable, made it seem too real, too close. It was now more than just legal jargon written on a yellow legal pad, but I had been violated to the very core of intimacy, not only physically, but emotionally as well. That part of me that I had reserved for the most private of moments had been invaded. It had become a part of me. It was an intricate part of my being, and to separate from it was to cease from being me. His request for me was impossible. The Commonwealth's attorney expressed his concern about my ability to see this case to its completion. It was then explained to me in great detail with visual aids of some beautifully prepared charts that this court battle was going to cost the Commonwealth of Virginia a tremendous amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, taxpayer dollars. The taxpayer not only was going to have to pay for my experts, but would also have to foot the bill for the experts for the defense. This was great news, because that's what I needed, was an added measure of guilt on top of what I was already feeling. Again, the multitude of questions and huge waves of doubt flooded my heart. I thought, how can I do this? How can I justify spending that kind of money for my own peace, my validation, my own day in court? And I can tell you there was no justification to be found. The truth is that we could lose this case, and all that money would have been spent without any accomplishment having been made. Now I was fighting an unexpected battle within. I knew that the Commonwealth's attorney was afraid of what had become a very public case. His experience prosecuting DNA cases was non-existent, and DNA was basically our only evidence, physical evidence. He asked me, his feelings of inadequacy were made very clear to me when he came to me and asked me if I would consider dropping the rape charge and charge this man for the $30 that he took out of my purse. The abduction and the assault, he felt fairly certain that we could convict him of these charges. See, it was too difficult for him. It was too much work It was his reputation at stake. I was naive enough to think that it was his job to help victims to attain the justice that our legal system promises its citizens. But he was looking for the easy way out. But I knew that if I didn't at least try to prosecute this man, that I was going to feel responsible for my rapist's future victims. If I failed to convince a jury of this heinous crime, then why would they believe me about the other charges against him, charges that really meant nothing to me? I told him it would be all or nothing, and I had to march forward with much prayer and determination. I had to do everything I could to keep Norman Jimerson behind bars for as long as possible. I couldn't allow intimidation or fear of failure to give him the opportunity to claim one more victim. I'm back down again, falling flat on my face. The Commonwealth attorney never called me to inform me about what was going on in my case. When I called his office, I was never granted a conversation with him, only his secretary. His office never returned any of my calls until I finally threatened to go to the newspaper about his performance. And even then, it was his secretary who called and apologized, promising to keep me informed. I waited and I waited for the trial to begin, one excuse after another. I was given grand jury hearing dates, but not informed that my case wasn't even on the docket until I finally called the courthouse because I couldn't wait any longer to hear the results. This didn't just happen once or twice, but 3 different times. And I thought, is it really worth this emotional roller coaster? Or maybe I should just get off this ride before it's too late. 1 year after they identified my rapist, my case finally went before the grand jury, with the news that the grand jury felt there was enough evidence to go forth with a trial came renewed strength and determination. Then I received the news that the Commonwealth's attorney had been appointed a judgeship. I felt that now we were almost back to square one. Would I now have to convince someone else that I not only could, but needed to go through the court system? Much to my surprise, though, this newly appointed Commonwealth attorney, it's a dream come true. Because you see, he understood my tears and my shaky voice as I went over the details of the rape yet again. He actually felt that I was a vital part of this case. And he even kept me informed of everything that was happening. He felt uncomfortable with his level of expertise on prosecuting DNA cases because, mind you, I was the 4th cold hit in the history of DNA analysis. So he teamed up with another assistant attorney, allowing her to fight the scientific battle while he fought the criminal element of the case. He would not allow his pride to be a detriment to his case. He believed in me and encouraged me to continue on. He knew this case was not without its problems, but he felt that it was worth the fight. But most importantly, he felt I was worth the fight. The defense did everything they possibly could to cause continuous delays. The judge kept granting the defense's motions to delay the case, even after promising me not to grant another. When tears silently flowed down my face, I was reprimanded from the judge, by the judge from the bench. He told me that there was no reason for me to be so upset, that the defendant was already in prison for another crime. Even the judge didn't get it. He didn't understand that my wound lay open until unable to heal until justice had found its place. What a price to be paid for justice. I wasn't sure if I could afford it because emotionally I was spent, not sure I could even hold up my head. Mr. Norman Jimerson waived his right to a speedy trial. I had no such right. I was never given that choice. Mr. Jimerson, can you see? Mr. Jimerson, do you need a break? Although I sat in that courtroom for each and every session, I was never acknowledged as a person or even a part of this case. I was even told at that time that I could be excluded from the courtroom. It was a crime against the state. I was just a number, another face in the courtroom, once again, a victim. More delays, but we pressed on. My husband and I had to see this to the end. The day finally arrived and the trial began. Mr. Norman Jimerson was assumed innocent until proven guilty. I had to prove my innocence to establish his guilt. Every action or non-action I decided in a moment of fear and under threat of life was now being scrutinized. Every decision I made during the attack seemed to make perfect sense at the time, but now I wasn't so sure. How do I convince this jury of 12 that I honestly thought I was making sound decisions? How can I give a detailed description of the rape with jurors who remind me of my mother, grandmother, and others who bring my son and husband to mind, listening intently to every single word? There was a flood of shame and guilt that made me nauseous, and the words stick to the roof of my mouth like sticky cotton as Norman Jimerson sits and glares at me, and his precious grandmother sits in silence with tears as she is comforted by Jimerson's brother. My reputation is at stake, my shame exposed before perfect strangers and friends that will hear the details for the first time. But it is for some of those same people that I had to continue. If I failed to protect them and others from this man, it would not be because I allowed my fears and anxieties to keep me from trying. 2.5 years after my rapist had been identified, the jury deliberated for 2 hours and brought me the verdict that I thought I'd only hear in my dreams. Guilty. Norman Jimerson is now serving 2 consecutive life sentences plus 25 years. Commonwealth attorney, now Judge Mike McGinty, took the time to fight this battle in the war against sexual assault. I believe with this conviction, we won more than just a single battle, for we prevented other battles from ever needing to be fought. I can stand today on my strong 2 legs as an example of a sexual assault victim that was able to come to terms with this horrible crime. But never in all of the 9 years of torment did I feel resilient, because all I did was move through each day, hoping for a better tomorrow. Many days I crawled, not able to rise to my feet, unable to ask for help that I didn't know that I needed, and I didn't know what kind of help I would need to stand on my own. In the clutches of fear, guilt, and shame, I constantly stumbled, questioning every truth I knew. Resilient? I'm not sure I fit most definitions, but I did have endurance, and endurance eventually taught me about resilience. It was in the trenches of endurance that I gathered strength and the knowledge I needed to find resiliency. When I finally emerged from those trenches of endurance, I was able to move beyond who I was to who I was meant to be. I was finally the someone else I wanted and needed to be. On my endurance journey to resilience, my husband and I formed a nonprofit called HEART, an acronym for Hope Exists After Rape Trauma. I was involved in the passing of federal legislation that bears my name, the Debbie Smith Act. This law allows Congress to allocate $151 million to state labs across our country to test the backlog of rape kits that are sitting on shelves behind locked doors. Lifetime Television made a movie about my personal struggles and efforts of endurance in working to get the Debbie Smith Act passed and funded. I speak all across our country and internationally on the effects of sexual assault on victims. I do not tell you these things to boast, but to illustrate to you that you don't have to feel strong to be strong. But how do these efforts help victims of sexual assault in their personal struggles? They needed more than having a solution to their case. How do I help individuals of sexual assault that are still in the trenches of endurance? To answer that question, Heart Incorporate developed victim-to-victim retreats. This program was designed in conjunction with victims of sexual assault to promote the unique bond between between survivors, and to foster emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical healing. The concept is so simple, but the results have been absolutely overwhelming. We come together as peers, sharing the common experience of sexual assault. It is one hurting heart telling another hurting heart where to find healing. We offer no solutions, only the means to explore the truth about how this trauma has affected our lives. Facing this truth unleashes us from the lies that we have constantly fed ourselves and allows us to find our own unique path to healing. We accomplish this through a series of 3 retreats, starting with 5 days in a large beach house, removing us from everyday cares. We create a safe venue, offering an opportunity to speak aloud feelings that we may have been unexpressed, that may have gone unexpressed for fear of how it may be received, or simply because the correct words could not be found to convey the depth of the hurt. We present curriculum with activities and almost 3 years of written work by a steering committee of educators, counselors, and victims that explains rape trauma and the lasting effect of shame that the shame of this crime has on its victims. We give the opportunity to cry without worrying how their tears will affect anyone else, to laugh without concern of being misunderstood, and the time and tools to chart a personal path to healing. Our goal is to encourage conversation and to foster relationships. Our hope is that what they learn about themselves through this time together, it will enhance the work that is already being done with a professional therapist. Each participant must be recommended by their therapist, and this retreat is offered at no cost to the participant. Phase 2 is a 1-day retreat where participants are allowed are accompanied by up to 3 people that they have chosen to walk alongside of them on their healing journey. The goal is to help these companions to understand the effects of rape and to give them the necessary tools to help them to be a valuable asset to the participants. Phase 3 is a day of review, revise, and resolve, reviewing what has been working well and what needs to be revised while resolving to continue on the healing path. These relationships have learned the right to say, I know how you feel, because they have spent time together listening and learning the heart of one another. During the course of these 3 phases, the shelter, meeting rooms, activity supplies, 3 days, 3 meals per day, all kinds of snacks, t-shirts, all of these are provided free of charge to each participant. They do need to provide their own transportation and from to and from each phase of the retreat. They are required to pay a $100 fully refundable deposit to secure their place at the retreat. Their deposit is returned to them at the end of phase 1. As a victim of sexual assault, I know firsthand how this crime affects family, friends, and community, creating many secondary victims. With that in mind, it's important to note that along with the success of each primary victim, there is the additional healing of many secondary victims associated with them. In closing, I need you to know that I have shared all these things with you to hopefully encourage you if your resiliency looks and feels a little more like endurance. I love the quote by Marianne Radmacher that states, "Courage does not always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow." This type of courage will help you to endure wherever you find yourself. If you're like me and you're unable to rebound quickly and you feel as if you're down far longer than you're able to stand, remember endurance will teach you strength and lead you to the path of resiliency. I agree with Alex L. when he said, I'm thankful for my struggle because without it, I wouldn't have stumbled along across my strength. Be encouraged. because just maybe resiliency is learned in the trenches. Thank you.
If you want to unmute and give you guys a round of applause, that would be awesome, Debbie. It was a great story. Thank you so much for for sharing that and being here with us.
You are so welcome.
That is dynamic. I want to open up the floor for anyone with questions, anyone who has anything they would like to say and share and discuss with Debbie now.
I don't have a question, Debbie, but that was very powerful. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing it and for protecting women everywhere, because you have. And that's just awesome. Your courage is awesome. And yeah, I really like you making me rethink the whole definition of the word resiliency. Yeah, that was really good. We work a lot with women and families, and you just gave me another whole level of understanding. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I want to second that, what Vicki said about a new understanding of resilience. I think that it's, I was kind of quoting you, summarizing some things you were saying as you were talking about specifically that definition, and coming to an understanding of what that meant and how it can look for persons who have lived through traumatic experiences. It isn't rapid, it isn't fast, and endurance could be an avenue toward it. So I really, really appreciate that kind of clarity and insight. That was excellent to have said that out loud. It was necessary. Awesome.
Debbie, I just want to say that, you know, every time I hear you tell your story, I'm amazed by your strength and your courage and just your ability to tell it and share with others, and how you've turned your pain and your life into a way to help other people. And so I really admire you for that. And I want to thank you again for your strength and courage and being able to do that. So thank you.
And I'm putting in the chat some resources for that accompany your story, Debbie, your organization, Heart, and also a link to the reenactment that was once aired on Lifetime that's now on Amazon Prime. Yep. But please, anyone who would like to say something, ask a question, please.
I'm pretty much an open book, so.
So Debbie, I have no words. It's just beautiful. But some years ago, I think your organization, maybe, I apologize, I'm embarrassed to tell you I don't recall, but was it a bracelet or an ornament or?
Bracelet.
A bracelet, okay.
Yes.
Well, I ordered one.
Oh.
My husband is a retired law enforcement officer as well, and he had told me about your story, and so.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Debbie. Yeah, I echo just, your story is amazing. And I think your strength in telling it is just really powerful. And so I really appreciate, I know it's not easy, even after all these years. And I think that is important for us to think about the definition of resilience. I want to take out the quickly every definition, because really, why does it have to be quick? I mean, I think when you go through something like you went through, who would rebound quickly from that? I mean, that's just not possible. And so I think by you talking through, you know, the humanness of it, because, you know, it's not possible. And I think if people think, oh, you're supposed to bounce back quickly, that's impossible. So I do think endurance is real and should be a part of every definition, because to me, sometimes resilience is just getting out of bed in the morning, or, you know, just one foot in front of the other, and that's okay. There shouldn't be this feeling of having it be quick in order to be right. It really should just, you know, especially the real choices that you made to continue on, and, you know, the love of your family in doing that, the resilience that they showed as well, I think is important, as you said. So yeah, I'm with Carl. I'm going to be processing it for a long time, but I just really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Would you be comfortable, and this is just from my knowledge so I understand, talking about maybe the process as it concerns the legislation, you know, what that legislation specifically kind of brought about for us as we deal with persons who are who have been raped and have to go through kind of an assessment and then a process maybe of a legal process. Can you just talk a little bit more about that so it could just be clear to me from the legislation standpoint of what that legislation did and what does it mean for people today?
Well, what the legislation did was it took backlog of rape kits off shelves, kits that had been locked up for years. It also led to other things such as finding kits that never made it to the lab because of lack of DNA. It now brought them to the lab because of the use of DNA, where they were able to process these kits and find perpetrators, and that before they just had no way to do it. So lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, help me, honey.
It also exonerated innocent.
It also, that's right. The other thing that this did was to exonerate the innocent, which there's nothing worse than having the wrong guy. That does not help anybody. So it was not an easy sell to Congress at first, but once they understood what we were trying to do, then the second time through, you know, they allowed it to be passed. But I'm sorry, I keep losing my train of thought. Can you rephrase that question again for me? What am I trying to answer?
No, I think you did answer it. I think that's kind of where, yeah, I wanted to know, what does the legislation mean for us today as people who are still subjected to being raped, and for the professionals that have to then navigate that situation with a person? What does the legislation kind of do for us?
Well, what it means is that, number one, we have rapists in the system now that we didn't have before. And we are able to get them off the streets a lot faster. Even when we don't know who they are, we are able, if we can't identify who the DNA belongs to, we can find commonalities from the different cases that will help to identify him or her, whatever the case may be, them. So it's so important. To me, this piece of legislation was probably the greatest thing that we have ever done for sexual assault victims, because it took away a great deal of, did it happen in the first place? Now we still have to prove, you know, whether or not it was consensual, but with the instruments that sexual assault nurse examiners have today to use, that's even becoming a lot easier to prove, because these trained nurses, which I am such a strong advocate for, these trained nurses are able to find things that your average doctor would not be able to see with the naked eye. So, you know, that is a huge help. But I have lost track of my question again. I am so sorry. I feel like I'm just off in left field. But sometimes I get so wrapped up in, my nerves are so messed up from what I just did. My questions don't always, your questions don't always come across as being answered. So did I answer the question?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Can you tell I'm still not a professional speaker, even though I've been doing this for years? But really, I don't look at myself as a professional speaker. I look at myself because I don't take, any funds that I get for speaking goes directly to our organization. I do not profit at all from my work. So, see, you get what you pay for. Sorry.
You're fine. I think, yes, you did answer my question. Thank you so much.
Okay, good.
Well, and I think, Debbie, I mean, I just appreciate you, especially during this week, and especially because you're the kind of grand finale, I guess, so to speak, of our Resilience Week, which I think is wonderful because, again, I think you've helped us to reframe resilience. And so I think as we move forward, certainly as a network, you know, we are a community network, and we want to be here for the community and help the whole community become trauma informed. And you know, everyone from all the people that you mentioned that you worked with, you know, I know we've come a long way.
Yes.
From 1989 about
absolutely
and how we ask things and how we show up to, you know, to folks who have experienced trauma. But I think as a community, I think it's important for us to reframe resilience and not have it be immediate. I never really thought about that part of the definition. Because again, I know that resilience doesn't happen quickly, and it shouldn't, you know, it really, the endurance part of it, I think, is something that we're going to carry forward. So
yeah, I think maybe the endurance, because I think before you can be resilient, you have to endure. I think, and I know I may have, this has been sort of a thing with me too, is referring to myself as a victim. I've been corrected many times, but the fact that I survived my sexual assault didn't change the fact that I was a victim of sexual assault. When people because this was all new, the word survivor was a new word, and they kept making me refer to myself and correcting me, but I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a victim. And I think that so often when we force that word on victims, they feel like it was less than what, you know, than that traumatic. Because that's, by being a survivor, I felt like I should have been able to hit the ground running. You know, that didn't speak empowerment to me. That made me feel, okay, then what's wrong with me? Why am I not feeling like much of a survivor? I'm feeling pretty much like a victim still, you know. So I think it's important to allow time for each of the stages, and understanding what a victim is. You know, I think we've put the wrong meaning behind victim. We've made it a negative instead of just an adjective of what's happened to us. We've made it a label, and it really just is a descriptive word of someone who has had something that happened. So I do use victim freely, because before I could survive, I had to be a victim of something. And I think to try to skip over the victim part makes survivorship and moving on to what I would describe as victory makes it a little more difficult, you know, because we're skipping a stage here. Somehow along the way, we have kind of given victim a bad rep, you know, unless of course you're a victim of a car theft or something like that, then it's okay. But if you're a victim of rape, you're discouraged from going through that step of victimization. And one of the things that we teach at our retreats is that, and it is such an eye-opening thing and can often take a good part of a day, is to teach them, You can't be a survivor unless you've been a victim of something. And to skip over that is to skip over the horrendous hurt. And so I can't tell you how many times in retreat that women, that's where their healing began, was when they realized, oh my gosh, I'm not only a crime victim, I'm a trauma victim, you know, and before I can reach survivorship or real survivorship or what a good survivorship looks like, I have to go through my victimization first. And so I think in some ways we've hurt victims by not allowing them. To be a victim of a crime is not bad on the victim's side. You know, it's not their fault. And to make them skip that point sort of indicates that it was their fault or that they had something to do with it. And it's like I tell the women I work with, I don't care what you were doing. I don't care if you were walking down Main Street absolutely naked. We might need to put you in Eastern State, but you don't deserve to be raped. There is no act that, you know, where you should deserve that. So,
so Debbie, what I hear you saying definitely is naming, being able to name. And I mean, I understand that maybe a label is not what we're looking for, but being able to really identify and name an experience and name an event and name the feeling even that we're going through, putting those kinds of names that are just what they are, which is the literal definition exactly. behind an experience can be very powerful and necessary. And I think many of our diverse communities of lived experiences, they're recognizing that, you know, we want to say victim, we want to say disability, we want to say rape, we want to say racism, you know, we want to just say the word, let it be identified so we can kind of target what's going on. Let's target Absolutely. It and face it. So we have a question, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we can't solve a problem, especially one like racism, unless we use the words that describe it.
Yeah. So this could be something for persons who've experienced sexual assault to kind of consider and think about. So the question is, do you have any resources or suggestions for those who have experienced sexual assault and it is unreported?
I guess as far as resources, the only thing that we offer is as hard is you know, our retreats, but and anybody can come to that. I also have a different definition of rape than what the legal definition is. I believe anyone who has been even molested, to me, that is a violation of your personal self, and to me that qualifies as rape because the effects are so much the same. It is that whole idea of being invaded and that privacy being invaded. So to me, rape, you know, is a more inclusive word than what our legal terms are. But the other thing that my greatest resource is RAIN, and that's Rape and Incest National Network. Okay. They are full of information and resources.
Awesome. And someone did, Jack put up in the chat that Avalon Women's Shelter.
Yes, Avalon as well.
It's a great local resource.
Yes.
With experts there on that. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. So it sounds as if you're saying build inclusive language with that second part, where how you redefine rape, build inclusive language around sexual assault, encourage people to really consider their experiences as invasive as, you know, taking your privacy and your autonomy away. And that could be a beginning step. That's that could be a beginning recovery step of understanding what you've been through and how similar it is to other people's experiences.
Exactly, because if we skip the stages, then we're always going to be lacking. And that's one of the things that, you know, that's our day one job at retreat, is to make each one of them understand that they are victims of sexual assault. If you don't, you know, if you have cancer and you ignore the fact that you have cancer, you can't get treatment. And until they understand that they are victims of sexual assault and that this is not just a crime against them, but it's trauma. And that's the key that seems to be able to help some who are so resistant to thinking of themselves as a victim, is the trauma part of victimization. When you can get them to understand that they are a victim of crime and that crime has caused trauma, then they're a little easier to grab hold of it. But I don't know where in our thinking that we decided that being a victim was a bad. I mean, other than the fact that it happened, but that as a victim, that word was a less than word. It's not. It just describes, it's a descriptive word of who I am. I am a victim, I am a survivor, but I am victorious because I live a wonderful life now. And I, as a result of this, I get to use my experience to help so many women. And I can tell you today, I would not want this experience out of my life. Had you asked me beforehand, I would have said, no, that's okay. I'll pass. But with it in my life, I am such a different person. I was able to access places that I sort of knew were inside of me, but because of my very timid and shy nature, my introvert self, I never knew how to access them. But I believe passion will do that. I hurt so deeply that my compassion gave me the passion that I needed to fuel my action. And because I had to help other women who were floundering as I was floundering and who were at the brink of suicide that I experienced, I had to find a way to reach them. And so and please don't, this was no grand scheme. It just sort of happened. My thing is that God orchestrated all of this. It just was his plan, and this is what came about. And I will also tell you this, and then I'll shut up, is that knowing what I know today, I would not want this out of my life. I do not regret it. I do not look at it as a tragedy in my life anymore. I feel that it's been redeemed through every person that comes through our retreat, every victim I have files upon files upon files of emails and letters from victims thanking me for the legislation or whatever, however they came across, our paths crossed. And I would not want to go back. So if that's what it took to be able to sit here today, then I'm okay with that.
One thing I also heard that you said that may need, and of course, just in a general kind of thought of the word victim, may need a new Google search to find a deeper meaning behind that definition.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think that it might come with some stereotypical beliefs of what that then means you can do as a victim. And now you have, I guess the right to be sad and to be, somber or depressed, and people can coddle you or something, some negative connotations with that identity, when in fact, that's not the purpose. That's not the reason.
Don't you think maybe sometimes that when people do put that negative spin on the word victim, that it's really their vulnerability? It's them realizing, oh my God, that really is real. And she's my neighbor. And if that can happen to her, this wonderful woman, then I don't want to be the victim. And so we tend to put that negativity on it to make it be something we want to shy away from.
Because it makes us feel safer and less vulnerable. In fact, I have a whole presentation built around that very idea. So that's kind of neat to hear you say that. But absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. We need to redefine what that means, what that word means.
Mm-hmm.
Because not to say the word doesn't mean that we're not it.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
You know, I can say that I'm not white, that I'm black, but that's not going to make it so. You know, we can say lots of things, but, you know, so I could say I'm not a victim of sexual assault, but all that does is to make my healing much harder. I cannot tell you how many times in retreat, that's when the light bulb came on, is when women understand I have been a victim. You know what? I'm sorry, my husband's trying to tell me. Butterfly. No, I don't know. Why don't you say it? You don't have to.
Now we use the butterfly a lot in what we the work we do with women, and they have to go through a transformation. They have to become something else, as Debbie has said, and go into a cocoon, a dark place, and do a hard transformation to come out to the beautiful other side.
Awesome.
But we can't be skipping steps. And I think we skip victim straight to survivor. And it's like, what? Wait a minute. Survivor from what? I have to know what I'm a victim of first.
Debbie, this is excellent. I'm really grateful for your wisdom and for your insight. Really, you're switching gears for us, at least for me and my work within the Trauma Informed Community Network, to really think about how, you know, we try to inform and we try to encourage others to really grab these resources and run with them. And I think that it's that aspect of running with them that maybe some people are feeling like, you know, it's too much, too soon, too heavy. How do I get there? What do I even define resilience as? And I've heard that honestly from someone else as well, who's had a lot to go on in her life. And she said, I don't know if I match a definition of resilience. You know, and just being alive means you've done a piece, you've done your part
right
so far to be as resilient as you can, because you're still here, you know.
Right.